By Thanksgiving, my wife wasn't asking for my house. She was practicing how to walk through it like I had already moved out. I'm Philips Mercer, 50 years old, an Army veteran with bad shoulders and a good memory for torque specs. I run a vintage car workshop on Pittsburgh's South Side. My life has always been built on steel, oil, and steady work. But this betrayal felt like being stripped for parts by the very people who swore they'd stand by me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. On November 18th, 2024, an appraisal slid across my kitchen table. $700,000. That row house wasn't just numbers. It was brick I rebuilt after deployments. Walls I stood under when my bones were too stiff to keep watch. And rails I gripped when pain threatened to drop me. The house stood because of me, but also because of a specially adapted housing grant the VA issued on January 28, 2021. That grant stapled itself to the deed with an addendum that, though quiet, carried more weight than I realized back then. Nadia, my wife, called the home our best asset. She said it with a half-smile that was more ambition than love. Then she began treating my life like staging for an open house. My unit coin, which I'd kept on the mantel since Iraq, was suddenly tucked into a drawer. My jackets, the ones with grease marks from the shop, vanished to the basement. Decluttered, she said. At dinner, the oven timer dinged. No one moved, not her, not Shabnam, my mother-in-law, who had become a permanent shadow in my dining room. She folded her napkin like she was closing a contract and said, "Liquid freedom beats heavy walls." Her voice was syrup over stone, but the meaning landed sharp cell before the court's cell before I could stop it. Days later, I found a receipt stuffed under a cedar candle on the counter. $3,950 for a ring upgrade. Not my size, not my taste. It wasn't for me. That receipt burned hotter in my chest than any deployment memory ever had. On December 5th, the proof dangled plain as sunlight. A third house key swung from Nadia's purse, the hardware store tag still taped on. No explanation, no apology. Just access, new access for someone else. That same night, her laptop screen glowed in the dark. I saw the draft of an email, list by Valentine's. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story, it's the anatomy of betrayal, written on receipts, emails, and the cold edge of a key. That night, I pressed my palm along the stair rail, the one the grant had paid for. Metal, cold, and honest. In winter 2022, my shoulders were on fire after unloading transmissions, and I slipped on the back steps. That rail caught me, stopped me from tumbling like I used to tumble through nights overseas. That rail wasn't decoration, it was survival. The same went for the reinforced roof. When storms came, the drip over my bed used to sound like a patrol's rain. After the brace, the silence was steady, not threatening. Those weren't cosmetic updates. They were the difference between coming home and staying home. So when Nadia spoke about our best asset, she wasn't talking about rails and roofs. She was talking about cash, freedom, liquidation. To her, the house was leverage. To me, it was the spine that still held me upright. I remember laying the $2,800 roof invoice on the counter. It looked like paper, but it felt like a photograph of my spine. On the top margin, I scribbled, "Every receipt is my pension." And in that moment, something shifted. I realized if they were planning a showing, I'd show them something else. Not empty rooms, not staged furniture, but paper that couldn't be staged. Receipts that couldn't be erased. Dates, amounts, signatures. My armor? Nadia must have sensed I knew. She started talking in code at dinner, testing lines about freedom and new chapters. Shabnam hummed along like a chorus. Their conversations became louder, then quieter, depending on who walked by. But betrayal has a sound. It's the scrape of a chair pushed back mid-sentence. The click of a key dropped into the wrong pocket. The hush that follows when they realize you're listening. On December nights, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, tracing the outline of that house on the appraisal sheet. $700,000. To them, a number. To me, a pension made of bricks, beams, and rails. I wasn't naive. I knew courts could carve, lawyers could swagger, papers could twist, But I also knew something they didn't. The law remembers veterans, even when families don't. That grant letter stapled to the deed was more than just paper. It was a boundary, a line they couldn't cross, not without a fight and not without me pressing every receipt into place. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence in block letters. Show them what can't be staged. The betrayal had started with whispers, with stage spaces, with the dangling shine of a new key. But my response would be simple. Evidence, quiet, undeniable evidence. And as the furnace hummed through the Pittsburgh winter, I sat back, coin in hand, invoices stacked, and thought, you can rehearse my absence all you want. But I'm still here, and this house, my house, remembers my name. The first panic hit me in the workshop. Smell of transmission fluid in the air, hands useless at my sides. It was December 2nd. My sister Leah perched on a stool with her travel mug of coffee, her accountant's eyes sharp even behind the steam. I opened my PNC banking app out of habit. Savings $48,300. That was the cushion I'd built over years of overtime and stripped knuckles. But three new transfers blinked at me like warning lights. $2,500, $3,750, and $1,200, each to Shabnam. Gifts, Nadia said later, shrugging like money was confetti. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were already somewhere else, fixed on a life where I wasn't standing across the kitchen. That night, I walked into the living room and heard the faint metallic snap of a tape measure retracting. The doorbell camera sometimes caught it too, clicks echoing in the foyer during what Nadia called brunch. Realtors call it staging. I called it invasion. And in Pennsylvania, audio laws don't care about my heartbreak. That footage was for my memory, not the courtroom. At night, the furnace hummed like it was borrowing someone else's heartbeat. I started recording my breathing on my phone just to have a rhythm to fall asleep to. Sometimes I'd whisper notes into the mic, as if speaking into a diary. One of those nights I caught myself saying, before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you suffer listening from. It sounds odd, I know, but when you feel invisible in your own home, you look for someone, anyone to hear you. Leah, though, didn't set flinch. She tapped through the numbers with her pen. Transfers to her mother in December. Almost 7,500 already. Phil, that's SEP's not household. That's SEP's staging budget. I rubbed my palm across the workbench where the carburetor sat open, its springs exposed like nerves. They SEP spending me out of my own walls. Leah tilted her head. Then you stop being reactive. You start tracking every dollar, every date. Paper can set lie. At the garage, I still tried to be steady. Evan, my 19-year-old apprentice, wandered in with grease up his forearm. He SEP's saving for community college. Casse Automotive Tech. He asked if I SEP still cover his spring books. I swallowed hard and said, count on it. We listened as the carburetor settled into a soft tick, like an old dog finding a warm spot. That sound grounded me. I realized this wasn't just about walls. It was about the promises stacked on those walls. If they took the house, they weren't just taking a building. They were taking every commitment I'd made under that roof. That night, Nadia didn't set posture. She sat on the couch with her knees folded, voice low. I grew up in rentals, Phil. Beige carpets, rules taped to the fridge. Every move felt like failure. I set in 41. I don't set want to feel like a failure anymore. Her confession might have been human, might even have been real, but I also knew it was loaded. A plea dressed as justification. I sat down across from her, careful with my words. This isn't set failure, Nadia. This is a home. Our home. Her eyes flicked away toward the appraisal folder. She wasn't listening. Leah was the one who grounded me again. She tapped the deed addendum with her finger like she was tapping a Bible verse. If this reads the way I think it does, they scepter walking straight into a judge sceptre's reading they one scepter forget. I stared at the papers spread across the table. The appraisal dated November 18th, the roof invoice, the Zells, the boutique arrears. To anyone else, they were clutter. To me, they were a map. And still, in the silence of that night, panic pressed down like weight on my chest. My house was being erased, room by room. My identity turned into numbers shuffled into someone else's account. So I did the only thing that made sense to me. I wrote in my notebook again, big block letters. Receipts don't set panic. People do. The next morning, I slid the notebook into my work satchel just above the $2,800 roof invoice. If the house was being erased, I'd redraw it, not with bricks or paint, but with paper. I stopped reacting and started printing. On December 12th, the Veterans Legal Clinic smelled like copy paper and old carpet. The kind of smell that tells you nothing flashy happens here, just the slow grind of paperwork, signatures, and tired truth. I carried my folder under my arm like it was a weapon. Inside, the VA grant letter dated January 28, 2021, the deed addendum stapled to it, the appraisal from November 18th, and my stack of invoices that told the story no one else seemed to care about. Miss Doyle was waiting for me. A lawyer from the Veterans Legal Clinic, late 30s, sharp-eyed, with that kind of voice that cuts but doesn't shout. She slid her glasses down, tapped the grant letter once, and said, "This isn't set a magic wand, but close to reinforced steel." I leaned forward, my fingers restless on the manila folder. "So what does it mean really?" She pushed the deed addendum across the table. "It means that to the extent equity in your house comes from grant-funded accessibility improvements, stair rails, stair lift, roof reinforcement, that equity isn't distributable, it's protected. They can scream about half the house all they want, but this paper says otherwise." Her words landed heavy, like armor being strapped on. Still, she wasn't sifted one for illusions. "Expect them to file for temporary exclusive possession," she warned. "Their attorney will try to paint you hostile, uncooperative. They said'll want you out so they can stage without resistance." I thought about the tape measure, clicks echoing in my foyer, the boxes creeping in. "They already started," I said. She didn't net flinch. "Then we prepare, quietly. You don't set storm, you build paper shields." That night, Leah came by the house. She wore her reading glasses low, accountant Sis's pen already in her hand. "I said'll build the ledger," she said. "Plain English, dates, amounts, what they mean. No spin." Leah had always been that way, more interested in the truth than the theater. She flipped open her pad and started jotting December 2nd, $2,500 to Shebnam. December 6th, $3,750 to Shebnam. December 9th, $1,200 to Shebnam. Transfers total $7,450. She underlined it twice. "This is how you fight people like Nadia and Shabnam," she said. "Not with shouting, with math." Still, I knew math alone wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. That's where Mr. Russo came in. Russo was 70, a retired mail carrier who lived 3 doors down. He had seen more front porches than any judge in Allegheny County. He stopped me outside the workshop one morning. Wool cap tugged low. "Heard your in-laws jawing outside on December 22nd, he said. "Something about sell before court. I can write it up if you need." I nodded, throat tight. A sworn statement from Russo might not sound like much, but in court, plain spoken truth from a neighbor beats polished lies. I also brought in Beck, a licensed PI, not some trenchcoat type. Beck worked clean, only public source observations, courthouse copies, neighborhood listserv slips. "No hacking, no tricks," he said. "If it's public, I can see it." He already had photos of boxes marked staging, master coming out of my front door on December 14th. He logged it, dated it, and had it notarized. Every piece slotted into place like gears in an engine. Leah's ledger, Russo's statement, Beck's affidavit, Doyle's legal framing. My receipts at the core. I circled January 21st on the wall calendar in thick black ink. Hearing date, underlined it 3 times, then, almost as ritual, I tucked the $2,800 roof invoice under my notebook like laying a foundation stone. That paper wasn't just ink and numbers, it was proof the house stood because I had kept it standing. And in the quiet of that December night, I caught myself whispering, "Paper shields, quiet allies. That's how you fight people who trade in noise." The furnace hummed steady. The coin in my pocket warmed against my palm. For the first time since Nadia's third key dangled from her purse, I felt the panic in my chest ease just enough for me to breathe. I let their story walk into a trap of their own making. By December 16th, Attorney Carver had swaggered into the picture. His letter landed in my inbox like a punch to the gut, dripping with contempt. He called my home a marital ATM, as if the brick and beams I bled for were nothing but cash in a wall. I slid the letter across the table to Miss Doyle at the clinic. She read it once, then calmly folded it back into the envelope. "We don't sit shout," she said. "We don't sit posture. We reply with paper." Her response was 3 polite pages. No fireworks, no dramatics. At the end, she attached the January 28th, 2021 VA grant letter and deed addendum. That single paragraph stapled to my dignity years ago was quietly waiting to be read in court. Doyle didn't underline it, didn't bold it. She just let it sit like reinforced steel, knowing one day a judge would be forced to read it out loud. Meanwhile, Beck, the PI, was out on the sidewalk. His camera caught Nadia and her realtor cousin strutting through my living room, tape measures stretched across the exposed brick, laughter bouncing off walls they thought were theirs. To them it was theater, to me it was evidence. Rousseau from his porch waved me over the day after. "Saw more boxes go in," he said, shaking his head. "Looked labeled for staging." He scribbled the date down on his pad without me even asking. That man knew the value of mail, of dates and postmarks. I tightened my grip on control where I could. On December 18th, I filed a fraud alert with the bank. No new joint credit lines, unless both signatures appeared. On December 19th, I met with my banker face to face. She leaned over her desk, tapping notes into her screen. "Understood, Mr. Mercer. No exceptions." That was my insurance. If they wanted to paint me as hostile, I would counter with reasonableness, boundaries, and receipts. Then came the brilliance of Doyle Sepp's plan. "Schedule fresh work orders for the stair lift and rails," she said. "Keep the improvements ongoing. Make it clear this house isn't set a stage, it's Sepp's functioning home." So on December 20th, contractors clanged in the stairwell, tightening bolts and replacing rail brackets. The sound of their drills echoed like music to me. Every new screw driven into wood was another nail in the coffin of Nadia's fantasy listing. And then came luck. Stupid, careless luck. A vendor, the cousin Sif's contact, accidentally CC spit the entire neighborhood listserv with a one-page flyer. Bold heading, soft launch. List by Valentine Seps. Rousseau printed it immediately, marched it down the street, and slapped it into my hands. Beck logged it into his affidavit as a public source exhibit. I stared at the words on that flyer, "List by Valentines," and felt something shift inside me. They thought they were building momentum, but what they were really building was my case, piece by piece, box by box, flyer by flyer. That night I cooked stew in my kitchen, potatoes, carrots, beef, thick and fragrant. The kind of meal that makes walls smell lived in. I sat at the table, steam curling around my notebook, and realized the irony. They were staging a house for strangers, while I was living in it. "Live your life," Doyle had told me earlier that day. "Don't sit stage theirs." So I did. I ate my stew, turned on the furnace, and let the hum run steady. My house was not a set. My life was not a prop. I looked at the manila folder stacked with evidence. The appraisal, the roof invoice, the Zells, the boutique arrears, the new work orders, the soft launch flyer, and whispered to myself, let them keep walking into their trap. I'll be waiting on the other side, paper in hand. I packed a lawyer's suitcase without ever leaving the bedroom. By December 23rd, I had stopped looking at Nadia for explanations. She'd already chosen silence where truth should have been. Instead, I turned my attention to numbers, the only language that couldn't be twisted. Transfers to Shibnam had now totaled $11,750. Every one of them logged by Leah, underlined in red in her ledger. The boutique arrears climbed to $6,420. Each figure stacked on top of the other like bricks in a wall I was building to keep myself upright. I spread the evidence across my desk like photographs of my own spine. November 18th appraisal, $700,000, stamped and signed. The January 28, 2021 VA grant letter with its deed addendum. The $2,800 roof invoice, still crisp where I simped written every receipt, is my pension. The boutique arrears notice, $6,420 in bold type. Bexip's affidavit with photos of boxes labeled Stagging Master. Rousseau's statement about overhearing cell before court. The soft launch flyer, accidentally CC'd to the whole neighborhood. I didn't need to shout. My allies didn't need to embellish. The truth was already written, logged, notarized. Christmas crept in quietly. The house didn't smell of pine or cookies. It smelled of paper, ink, and the faint tang of printer toner. I didn't mind. To me, that was survival. On Christmas night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, notebook open. I wrote one line in block letters, Public Truth, on January 21st. I didn't write it for inspiration. I wrote it as instruction, because I knew Carver, Nadia, and Shabnam would try to drag this fight into shadows, whispers, gossip, our best asset, spinning in circles. My job was to drag it into the light. Leah came by the next day with her ledger tucked under her arm. She laid it out page by page. Transfers here, boutique here, arrears here. It sets all plain English, Phil. No judge can mistake what this means. Her pen tapped at the numbers like a heartbeat. Paper doesn't set lie. On December 27th, Beck dropped a slim folder on my desk. Public records he'd pulled, nothing illegal, just courthouse filings, a copy of Carver's motion and draft, even chatter from the realtor cousin's social media about big changes coming soon. He logged it, dated it, signed it. I slid the folder into the stack. My lawyer's suitcase, filling without ever leaving the house. By December 30th, the house felt more like an evidence locker than a home. And maybe that was okay for now. Every corner of it was under siege anyway. Better to turn the siege into strategy. On January 3rd, I scheduled the locksmith. Only the back workshop door for inventory security. I paid $145 and kept the receipt tucked into the folder. The front door, left unchanged. Access offered through counsel, exactly as Doyle instructed. Because here's the truth. Veterans don't win by force. We win by patience, discipline, paper trails. At night, I sat with my coin in one hand and the roof invoice in the other. I thought about Iraq, the way every patrol depended on someone checking bolts, loading rounds, verifying maps. One slip, and everything collapsed. This was no different. Each receipt was a round chambered. Each affidavit a bolt tightened. Nadia thought she was erasing me by bringing in tape measures and cousins with realtor smiles. But every move she made was another mark in my ledger. Every careless transfer, every box labeled staging, every flyer printed for strangers, all of it stacked higher, heavier, stronger. And me? I was still here, quiet, watching, writing. By New Year's Eve, fireworks cracked over Pittsburgh. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder in front of me, the roof invoice on top. I whispered into the silence, "This is my spine." Because it was. Veterans don't measure survival in medals or applause. We measure it in what still holds us upright when the world wants to take everything away. For me, that was rails, roofs, and receipts. I closed the folder, slid it onto the shelf above my desk, and turned out the light. The house hummed around me. Not as a stage, not as an asset, but as proof. Proof that come January 21st, I'd walk into that courtroom not empty-handed, not broken, but armored with paper. The countdown started the second their filing hit the clerk's desk. It was January 2nd, the courthouse barely back from holiday closure, when Carver lobbed his first shot, a petition for temporary exclusive possession. He painted me as hostile, claimed I was interfering with the marital property. Hostile? Me, the one who had let tape measures snap in my foyer, boxes roll through my doorway, cousins whisper about listing dates. Hostile when all I'd done was breathe in my own house. Miss Doyle called me that morning. "It SEP's a performance," she said. "They want you out fast so they can stage and list without resistance. Don SEPs take the bait. We still answer with steel, not sound." So on January 3rd, per counsel, I rekeyed the back workshop door only. I told the locksmith, "Just this one, inventory security. He handed me the $145 receipt, and I tucked it straight into the manila folder. The front lock left unchanged, and through Doyle I offered access via attorney's proof. I wasn't hiding, wasn't blocking, wasn't hostile. That night, Nadia staged her own performance. She packed a bag, told me she was staying with her mother, and left her iPad still synced to our Wi-Fi. Every few hours it pinged calendar alerts, reminders, realtor cousin's color-coded staging schedule. I never touched the device. I just watched the pings like distant fireworks. Memory only, not evidence. I knew the line between careful and reckless. Meanwhile, Doyle filed our response. Clean, precise, deliberate. She attached the SAA-type VA grant letter dated January 28, 2021. The deed addendum stapled to it. The November 18th appraisal. The December 20th work orders. Russo's sworn statement, notarized. Beck's public source affidavit with the listserv flyer. Leah's ledger plain as daylight. When I read her draft, I could almost hear her voice, calm, firm, every word built to survive cross-examination. No flair, just fact. Leah came by that evening with her ledger under her arm. She flipped to the December page, pen-tapping at totals. Transfers to Shabnam, $11,750. Boutique arrears, $6,420. Reiki receipt, $145. It seems all in order. Her eyes softened behind the glasses. Phil judges don set fall for theater. They fall for paper, and we set got plenty. I pressed my navy suit that night. The one I hadn't worn since Leah's retirement party last spring. I laid it across the chair, smoothed the shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, like memory stitched into cloth. On my desk, I stacked the folder again. On top, the $2,800 roof invoice. Not because it was the newest or flashiest, but because to me it was the most personal proof that the roof overhead wasn't decoration. It was survival, proof that my pension wasn't money in a bank. It was steel and shingles in Pittsburgh winter. I slid my unit coin into my pocket, rubbed it once between my fingers, and whispered into the quiet. Every receipt is my pension. Every date is my defense. By January 10th, Carver's swagger hadn't slowed. He filed motions dressed up in drama, language thick with adjectives. But every time Doyle answered, it was surgical. Straight citations, the addendum front and center. No wasted words. Russo stopped me outside the garage on January 15th. "You ready for the 21st?" he asked. His wool cap was pulled low, his breath clouding in the cold. "As ready as a man with receipts can be," I said. He chuckled. "That sep's all a judge cares about, dates and ink." On January 18th, Doyle called to finalize. "Phil, you'll testify briefly. Plain English. Don't editorialize. Just facts, what the grant funded, what the addendum says, what you paid for repairs. Leah will walk the ledger. Russo will repeat what he overheard. Beck will authenticate his photos and flyer. I'll handle the law." Her voice was calm, measured, steady. "Judges respect service and paperwork. Breathe. Let the law do the talking." That night I walked through the house slowly, one room at a time. The stair rail cold under my hand, the furnace humming low, the roof solid overhead. I paused in the kitchen, looking at the table where receipts were stacked like prayers. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Nadia's silence, not of Carver's swagger, not of Shabnam's gossip. The countdown had started. But for once it was counting down to my truth, not theirs. On the morning of January 21st, I stood in the elevator lobby at 8:12 a.m., navy suit pressed. Roof invoice in the manila folder, coin in my pocket, breath steady. Doyle stepped out beside me. Her briefcase neat, her expression unreadable. She glanced at me once and said, "Judges respect service and paperwork. Remember that." And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I believed her. He performed, we prosecuted by reading January 21st, 2025, Courtroom 5. B. Allegheny County. The wood benches smelled faintly of polish, the kind that tries to hide decades of sweat and argument. I sat at the table, navy suit pressed, roof invoice on top of the manila folder, coin heavy in my pocket. The furnace hum of my house had been replaced by the electric silence of a courtroom waiting for combat. Carver strutted in first, file box tucked under his arm, tie knotted like he'd practiced it in a mirror. Nadia trailed behind, black coat folded over her arm, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. Shabnam swept in last, chin high as though the judge's bench was a stage, and she'd been cast as matriarch. The bailiff called order. My breath slowed. Carver began. He painted the picture like he was auditioning for theater. Your Honor, this property represents marital equity. My client has contributed years of partnership and is entitled to half. We request exclusive possession to prevent further hostility, obstruction, and the potential dissipation of value. He threw words like darts. Hostile, obstruction, dissipation. None of them true. All of them designed to stick. Nadia dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue she'd folded long before she entered the room. Then Doyle stood. No theatrics, no raised voice. She opened her folder and withdrew the grant letter dated January 28th, 2021, the deed addendum stapled to it, and the December 20th work orders. She laid them flat on the podium, hands steady. Your Honor, she began. This property is not merely marital equity. It contains by statute and by deed protections attached to a specially adapted housing grant issued to Mr. Mercer as a veteran with service-connected disabilities. She held up the addendum. The paper looked ordinary, but her voice gave it weight. The addendum specifies that to the extent equity is attributable to grant-funded accessibility improvements, stair rails, stair lift, roof reinforcement, that equity is not distributable and cannot be carved. The petition for exclusive possession, therefore, collides with federal and state restrictions. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She read the paragraph slowly, each word clicking into place like a lock turning. Carver shifted in his seat. Nadia's tissue froze halfway to her cheek. Shabnam's chin faltered just enough for me to see her jaw tighten. Doyle went on. We submit exhibits: the January 28th, 2021 VA grant letter, the deed addendum, the November 18th, 2024 appraisal, the $2,800 roof invoice, the December 20th stair lift work orders. Each connects directly to grant-funded accessibility improvements, the very improvements the addendum protects. She set the papers down one by one, as if laying bricks in a wall they couldn't climb. Then came the witnesses. Rousseau took the stand first. His wool cap replaced by a pressed shirt, his voice plain. On December 22nd, I overheard the petitioner Sepis' mother say, "Sell before court to Sepis." That was her phrase. I remember because it struck me as unusual. He didn't dramatize. He just said it like he was delivering mail, date, time, words. The judge nodded. Next came Beck. He authenticated the neighborhood listserv flyer, the one accidentally blasted to every inbox on Carson Street. I obtained this from public channels, he said, steady as a metronome. Dated December 16th. Language soft launch. List by Valentine Seps. Carver objected, muttering about relevance, but the judge waved him down. Exhibit admitted. Leah followed. She laid her ledger on the table, pen tapping the margins. December transfers totaling $11,750 to the respondent Sepja's mother. Boutique arrears $6,420. None of these reflected joint household expenses. She didn't embellish. She didn't scold. She just read the numbers like a weather report. Cold, undeniable. Finally Doyle closed. The law is not theater, she said. It is text. And the text here, the addendum, limits what this court can order. Respectfully, the petition for exclusive possession cannot survive. The judge leaned forward, glasses low, reading the addendum himself. The silence was so sharp I could hear the scratch of his pen as he underlined. Then he spoke. Not loud, not dramatic, but measured. The petition for exclusive possession is denied. No listing or marketing of this property is permitted absent further order of the court. Counsel are cautioned to align all future requests with the restrictions contained in the addendum. No gavel slam, no theatrics, just words. But those words landed heavier than any hammer. I exhaled quietly. my hands unclenched around the coin. Carver shuffled his papers, muttering about unexpected constraints. Nadia's tissue dropped into her lap, unused. Shabnam's eyes darted to the floor. Me? I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just breathed steady for the first time in months. Because the truth had been read into the record, in plain English, where no one could erase it. Silence on the courthouse steps sounded like a mask hitting concrete. Carver muttered first, his voice clipped and low, a man rehearsing excuses even before his client asked for them. Unexpected constraints, he said, adjusting his tie, eyes avoiding Nadia's. Nadia looked at me then, really looked at me, as if honesty itself was a form of cheating. Her tissue was gone. Her mask of dry tears had slipped. Behind her, Shabnam stood stiff, arms crossed, lips tight like a door slammed and bolted. The courthouse doors hissed shut behind us, and the winter air cut across my face. January in Pittsburgh has a way of reminding you what's solid. Back home that evening, I sealed the December 5th copy key, the one I'd seen dangling from Nadia's purse weeks earlier, into a plastic bag. I slipped the $145 locksmith receipt in with it. Proof that I hadn't locked her out, proof that I'd only secured my workshop, proof that I'd drawn the line exactly where counsel told me to. Leah sat at the kitchen table, glasses low, ledger open. She updated the totals with quiet strokes of her pen. Transfers $11,750 to Shabnam, boutique arrears $6,420. Each figure still standing, but now pinned under the weight of a judge's order. Beck sent over his memo the next day. Staging visits dropped to 0, it read. Clean, factual, dated. No more boxes, no more tape measure clicks echoing in the foyer. The cousins' laughter had evaporated, leaving only the hum of the furnace and the tick of the kitchen clock. Russo waved from his porch when I stepped outside to bring in the mail. He didn't have to say anything. The nod between us said enough. Truth had been delivered, and the street knew it. But Nadia wasn't set done with words. That night, long after Leah left and the house settled into quiet, my phone buzzed. A text. From her. I was scared of becoming nobody. That was all it said. 7 words. No apology, no strategy, just fear typed into a glowing screen. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering but unmoving. I believed her fear. I knew what it felt like to look at walls and wonder if they defined you or imprisoned you. But belief didn't mean surrender. I couldn't hand her my spine just because she was scared of her own shadow. So I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down beside the manila folder, coin resting on top. I told myself out loud, boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are survival. The next morning, Doyle emailed the draft settlement terms. Simple, clean, precise. I keep the house outright under the grant protections and deed addendum. Nadia receives $12,000 from non-protected savings, plus selected personal property. She's responsible for her boutique card with help from her family. Both parties waive claims to grant-funded improvements. Conference set for January 28th. I read it 3 times, slow. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't cruel. It was boundary, written in legal ink. Nadia's cousin stopped showing up on the street. Shabnam's voice stopped floating through the walls. For the first time in months, the only sound I heard at night was the hum of the furnace and the soft tick of my own watch. And in that quiet, I realized something I hadn't felt in weeks. The house was breathing in my rhythm again. Justice didn't roar, it clicked. January 28th, 2025. Settlement Conference, 9th floor. The room wasn't a grand courtroom with oak panels and gable echoes. It was a narrow space, fluorescent lights humming, a table too small for the weight of what it carried. Winter light pushed through frosted glass, falling across piles of folders and untouched cups of coffee. Nadia sat across from me, coat draped over the chair. Her face was pale, drawn tight around the eyes. Shabnam perched beside her, stiff and silent, lips pressed thin. Carver leaned back, legal pad open, pen twirling between his fingers like a baton. He looked less sure of himself than in courtroom 5B, but he hadn't lost his habit of posturing. Doyle opened her folder. voice even. Steady. Terms are straightforward. Mr. Mercer retains the house outright, under the protections of the Specially Adapted Housing Grant and the deed addendum. Mrs. Mercer receives $12,000 from non-protected savings, plus selected personal property. Both sides waive any claim against grant-funded improvements. The property is not to be listed, marketed, or otherwise encumbered absent further order of this court. Her tone was clinical, almost surgical. No theatrics, just plain English. Carver tried first. We maintain this house as marital equity. Doyle slid the $2,800 roof invoice across the table, setting it down like a card in a game already won. Paid for with grant funds, she said. Carver hesitated, cleared his throat. But surely, Doyle slid the December 20th work orders forward, the ink still fresh. Also grant-funded improvements, restricted. Carver's pen stopped twirling. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just let the documents speak, one by one. The judge, seated at the head of the table, leaned in. He flipped through the addendum, lips moving silently as he read. Then he set it down and spoke with the same calm weight he had in the courtroom. The terms as outlined are consistent with the addendum and protections in place. Counsel Seb's objections are noted and overruled. The settlement is approved. Any marketing of this property requires further order. That was it. No thunderclap. No dramatic pause. Just a signature on the line, a seal on the paper, and the click of a pen cap snapping shut. Justice, in plain English. Nadia's shoulders slumped. She didn't look at me. She stared at the tabletop as though the grain in the wood could explain how everything had slipped away. Shabnam leaned in close, whispering something sharp in her ear. Nadia didn't move. Her hands stayed flat against the table, palms pressing into the surface like she was bracing for impact. Carver gathered his pad, muttering about alternative remedies. But he didn't push, he couldn't. The law had already spoken. Me? I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I just nodded toward the bench and closed my fingers around my coin. Walking out of that room, the winter air felt different. Not lighter, not warmer, but honest. Cold and steady, the way truth should feel. Back home that night, I laid the settlement order on the kitchen table, roof invoice still clipped to the top of the folder. I ran my hand along the stair rail again, the one that had stopped me from falling 2 years ago. It gleamed under the kitchen light, solid, cold, unshaken. I whispered to the empty house. You set your mind, in law, in ink, in truth. The furnace hum came back in my key. By February, Pittsburgh's snow had retreated into gray ropes along Carson Street. The city smelled of salt and slush, the kind of winter thaw that leaves more mud than beauty. But inside my row house, the air was different. Lighter, steadier, mine again. I rehung my squad photo over the dining table. The frame was scratched, the glass a little cloudy, but I left it that way. Every scar told the truth of where it had been, just like me. Beneath it, the wood still bore the faint water ring from years ago when the roof drip had threatened to rot the ceiling. I didn't sand it out. I wanted the mark to stay, proof that I had fought to keep this place standing. I mailed Russo a handwritten note with a $100 coffee card tucked inside. For your testimony and for your porch, I wrote. He waved the letter at me across the street the next day, smiling like the whole block had breathed a sigh of relief. I paid Beck promptly. He delivered his invoices in neat manila envelopes, each line logged, hours, miles, copies, clean work worth every cent. Leah refused payment, of course. She said family doesn't charge. But I slipped a $300 check under her mug during our next coffee. She found it later, frowned at me through the kitchen window, then deposited it anyway. On February 2nd, Nadia came back for her last boxes. No lawyer, no cousin, no Shabnam, just her standing on the porch with a cardboard box cradled in her arms. She didn't look me in the eye. She just nodded once, the kind of nod that means, this is the end. I didn't answer. I let her carry her silence down the steps, into the waiting car, and out of my life. After the car pulled away, I stood in the doorway, listening. The house hummed with the furnace, steady and warm, no tape measures clicking, no whispers through walls. Just mine, That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line: "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." It wasn't stet anger anymore. It was fact. I slid the settlement order into the manila folder penciled kept on the tab and shelved it high, above reach but never out of memory. The next morning, I replaced the dead bulb above the sink. For months I'd let it sit dark, telling myself it wasn't urgent. But now, when the light flicked on, it filled the kitchen with warmth. Not staging light, not realtor's glow, just home. The house had learned my name again. Guilt unfriended me before anyone else did. The realtor cousin disappeared from my social feeds. No more brunch photos, no big announcement coming soon. Carver, I heard through the grapevine, was reviewing intakes after a judicial eyebrow lifted in open court. Shabnam avoided me at the church bazaar, drifting past the bake table like I was a ghost she couldn't risk acknowledging. But absence has its own kind of presence. There's silence-filled rooms that used to echo with gossip, and in that silence I found something steadier than relief: peace. Sundays became ritual again. I'd start a pot of stew in the morning, the same way I had during deployments when a warm smell meant home no matter where you were. Russo would knock mid-afternoon, bread tucked under his arm, his grin easy. Leah would follow an hour later with her ledger no longer filled with red ink, but with recipes she wanted to try. We'd eat together at the same table Nadia once called too old-fashioned. The wood creaked, the chairs scraped, and the room felt alive again. One evening, Evan walked into the shop with a grin so wide it split his face. "Got it," he said, waving a thin envelope. Inside was his acceptance letter to CCAC's automotive tech program. He laid out the bursar sheet on my workbench: tuition, fees, book costs, all itemized like a parts list. I traced the numbers with my finger, then pulled my checkbook from the drawer. "I told you, count on it," I said, writing the amount for his books without hesitation. His eyes went glassy. "I won't waste it," he said. I know, I told him. Neither will I. And I meant more than just the check. I meant the house, the rails, the quiet evenings with stew and bread. I meant the receipts that had carried me through a storm and deposited me back into a life worth living. By March, I could walk the backyard slope without counting my breaths. The cold air didn't choke me anymore. It cleared me. I'd pause at the fence line looking back at the row house. Red bricks steady against the pale sky. No realtor's sign in the yard. No cousin's laughter in the foyer. Just my house. My pension in bricks. What greed left behind wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. The people who thought walls were cash had vanished. The people who thought walls were home had stayed. Russo on his porch. Leah with her pen. Evan with his books. Me with my coin warm in my pocket, and the furnace hummed steady at night. I realized then that betrayal takes things, yes, but sometimes it also gives. It gave me boundaries I'd never drawn. It gave me allies I might have overlooked. And it gave me the truth that greed, no matter how loud, eventually trips over its own silence. In April, a postcard tried to sell me a new story. It came tucked between the water bill and a coupon flyer, bright and glossy. Across the front, grand reopening. The logo belonged to Nadia Sepp's boutique, but the return address was Shabnam Sepp's house. The slogan shouted in gold script: "Built from the ground up." I stood in my kitchen, postcard in hand, and laughed, soft, not bitter. Built from the ground up. As if walls and rails and roofs were accessories, as if ground wasn't the one thing you couldn't cheat. I slipped the card behind the stairlift work order in my folder, not out of spite, but for symmetry. Their slogan stacked against the invoice that proved what ground really was. Reinforced beams grant money, rails that stop me from falling. The house around me was quiet, the furnace steady, the stair rail cool under my hand. My coin sat in my pocket, edges worn smooth. I thought about all the papers I'd stacked: the appraisal, the ledger, the receipts, the affidavits. Each one had been more than evidence. They'd been prayers. Proof that justice doesn't always roar. It often whispers, clicks, signs its name at the bottom of a page. If anyone asks me what saved my home, I won't say strength. I won't say luck. I'll say a judge reading one quiet paragraph, and a man who believed receipts could be sacred. Because justice isn't loud. Justice is a door that closes softly and locks from the inside. And my house? It still hums my name.